Hello and welcome to Earth Observed, a podcast where I sit down with the founders, the technical leaders, and the minds shaping the future of Earth data, geospatial technology, and atmospheric AI across Europe, North America, and beyond. In each episode, we take a vertical dive into a topic chosen by our guest, giving you a front row seat to the ideas, the tools, and the challenges that enable innovation from space to subsurface and everything in between. Today, I have the pleasure of being joined by Rosalie van der Maas, co-founder and CEO of Ellipsis Drive. And today, we're going to be talking about the geospatial paradox. Rosalie, thank you very much for joining me today. It is much appreciated. How are you?
It's great to be here. Thanks for the invite. I'm happy to sit down today and chat.
Yeah, awesome stuff. So I guess before we jump into any particular discussion, Ellipsis Drive, you're the co-founder and CEO, as mentioned. Why don't you give the audience just a brief insight as to who Ellipsis Drive is, what it is you do, and I guess just briefly how?
Yeah, for sure. So Ellipsis Drive in a nutshell is a spatial data management solution that is looking to make it easy for everyone who uses spatial data to get their spatial data out to their audiences in a seamless way. Basically making sure that however end users are looking to consume spatial data is serviced without the provider of that data needing to worry about any specific protocol, any specific format, any specific endpoint that they may prefer. So we basically make sure that we translate between the preferences of data providers and the preferences of data users, and make a seamless connection between the two. And we've sort of filled this, or we sort of put this into a format that people recognize, which kind of looks like Google Drive, hence also the name Ellipsis Drive, that sort of makes it like this intuitive tool that is a real utility to people that use it.
Yeah, absolutely. I've actually spoken to a few guests now in terms of AI education, tooling, and the intuitivity of products and tooling is a talking point that has come up quite frequently, actually. So clearly, there's a common theme here. There's a common need, and hopefully today we will dive deeper into that. So I guess let's talk about data landscape and standards first. Geospatial is notorious for atypical data volumes and proprietary formats. Why do you think that this has persisted for so long, and what are the biggest consequences for teams working with that data?
Yeah, so to break that down a bit, I suppose. I mean, it's logical that like spatial data exists within its own class, because it's not like other data. Like when you talk about big data, we usually have like data in mind that can fit into a table, like into rows and columns and nested rows and columns that eventually point at specific files, perhaps. And that data format is something that is very well supported by the market. There are many tools for that type of data that allow you to do humongous data dumps, that still allow you to do quick queries, that allow you to do quick computes. But when it comes to spatial data, it doesn't fit the tabular format, especially when we speak about raster data or point cloud data, which is often also EO data and EO derived products. So yeah, within the Earth observation field, you run into your content and your workflows not being compatible with standard big data tools that are tailored towards these tabular pieces of content. So in that sense, it makes sense that it's this class of its own, but it is a class of its own that behaves like a special snowflake a bit too much, in my opinion, and I believe the opinion of many others with me. And yeah, of course, the data is very voluminous. It can be very complex. The metadata is usually pretty complex. It's spatial data, so every pixel and every attribute is connected to a specific point on Earth. So you're dealing with coordinates, you're dealing with projection. That's highly mathematical. So yeah, it's difficult data to deal with. But at the same time, we also sort of see that whilst it's fair enough that there have been challenges along the way as the geospatial field has developed, we also see that there are indeed a lot of standards that have been littered. And I think that's where the industry can shoot itself in the foot a bit too much, because we create standards for every exotic use case that is out there. We create standards that get very bloated, and we're not very good at um, keeping a protocol for every single issue. Like, for example, if we, and this may be an unpopular opinion, but if we take the COG, like the cloud optimized GeoTIFF, that has become pretty prevalent throughout the industry. It's been a very welcome protocol slash file format for the sellers of EO data. But in what I just said also lies a problem. Like, it's a file and a protocol at the same time, which for any other like sort of IT person, computer scientist, or data scientist working with non-spatial data would be a huge red flag. Is like, what are you doing? Why is this a file and a protocol in one? That doesn't make any sense.
Right.
Like, we would never create applications that read directly from a database either. You have to have an API in the middle. So if we sort of look at it from the perspective of like regular IT, um, it raises a lot of questions already, and it has some benefits. Like, it's relatively easy to create from the perspective of the seller of EO data, but it doesn't really service the needs of our downstream audiences. Like, what's the use case of a cog for someone who is looking to render that data in onto the web? Like, XYZ
Yeah.
is a much better protocol. It's simpler, it's more scalable, it can cache, and it sort of ticks the boxes of just general computer science best practices. And that's just one example for the cog specifically. But yeah, we're definitely good at creating new protocols every year, and bloating the ones that we already have. And then, like, what comes to mind is that comic on standards. I'm not sure if you're familiar, but it's about the proliferation of standards all over the place. So not just for geospatial, but it
Yeah.
says like, yeah, first you have those 14 standards, and then you have two people discussing like 14 standards. That's crazy. We should just have one standard that services everybody's needs. And then the next situation is, okay, now we have 15 competing standards, and so forth, etc.
Right. Okay. So from what I gather there, and one point I do want to mention is this special snowflake. I feel like you have elaborated on it somewhat, but I'd love to touch on that in just a moment. But from what I have gathered from what you've just said, there is that upstream there are maybe a few challenges, a few problems that maybe we need to sort out before that data does arrive downstream, and that actually maybe there's uh, things happening upstream that are maybe counterproductive. Maybe they sort of cancel each other out. Have I got that correct?
Yes and no. In that sense, like, what I'm saying is these standards are popping up because they service specific use cases, but along the value chain of spatial data, including Earth observation data, um, there are different needs being serviced. So, for example, if you are a satellite operator and you're looking to host all of your EO content in a unified way, it's attractive to create cogs, because from your perspective, it's relatively easy to do. But if someone downstream is looking to get like a piece of content that you're offering to them rendered onto the web, it makes a lot more sense to offer it as XYZ, but that's from the perspective of the user. And that's sort of where we see different protocols popping up because different stakeholders along the value chain value different things. And that's sort of where we start to go haywire.
Understood. Understood. And you mentioned the special snowflake. In our initial conversation, you spoke about geospatial being its own worst enemy. Tell us a little bit more about why you feel that way, and what sort of information is there to make you come to that conclusion ultimately?
Yeah, so I touched on it a little bit already, and you sort of see this in indeed what are considered best practices when you look at like non-spatial data management. And when you look at what we do with spatial data management, it can be it can be very counterproductive. So, for example, when you manage data and when you're looking to render like non-spatial data onto the web, you think about things like scalability, like simplicity, like interoperability, the possibility to cache. And then when we look at what the geospatial industry is doing, it is not really lining up with those like simple key objectives. Um, so yeah, that's where you sort of see that the industry can be its own worst enemy by sort of chasing its own tail in looking to, for example, bloat protocols that are created for rendering purposes with options and transactions and negotiations around metadata, for example. And it may sound very puristic to want to say, well, let's keep those apart, but it is a very fair statement to make. Like if you want to have something that renders, and if you want to have something that negotiates around metadata, don't put them together in a bloated protocol. Just keep them separate. Um, and that's just not something that gets applied a lot within the geospatial industry. And it may be based in the fact that geospatial is its own field, which is fair enough. Like it has emerged as its own field, and it has emerged as a field that requires its own experts. And you sort of see that as a human being, it's difficult to be very good at two things at the same time. So the world of like general developing, like the development around just um, software that's non-spatial, and development around spatial software, you sort of see that they're on two separate tracks. Because in the early days of the geospatial industry, these concepts were so hard to wrangle that you couldn't like reasonably marry them to general IT. But we have come to a point in time where you really do want these roads to converge,
Yeah.
and they're not. And I think it indeed has to do with the fact that uh, back when you were a geospatial expert, you couldn't really have been expected to also be uh, a developer or an architect. So I think it's a bit of baggage that we have inherited from where the industry has come from. But I do believe that at this point in time, where everything is so data heavy, spatial data and non-spatial data at the same time, where we've been through so many leaps forward within so many industries at the same time, that it is time for these roads to properly converge, and
Yeah.
where the geospatial industry can't be that special snowflake anymore, because otherwise we're making ourselves less relevant, because we're already regarded as too complex from the outside in, and
Yeah,
it's
it
not
makes sense.
entirely wrong either.
Yeah, no, that does make sense. You mentioned interoperability. It's always been a sticking point. How does the lack of interoperability limit innovation? And I guess what's the cost of companies trying to build at scale?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think I would be kicking down an open door when I say a lack of interoperability is obviously holding back innovation, because innovation happens when different minds can be put to a task, and different disciplines can access resources to unleash creativity and create synergy. It's a gross word for many, but it's true in this case. So when you don't invest in interoperability, and when you don't sort of make sure that your infrastructure and your data is interoperable, and just to make sure we're talking about the same thing, for me, interoperable is that um, data can be accessed via different systems, via different protocols, by different
Yeah.
people very easily.
Mhm.
If that's not something you support, your data is siloed, and if your data is siloed, it effectively is only accessible by a single system or by a single sort of professional class within your organization. And yeah, that really holds back any chance at creativity or applying spatial data to new challenges. Um, so yeah, it's a very worthwhile investment to make as any company, as any organization. Um, and it's also something that you see people at a government level really get sort of hyped up about, and insistent on. That, for example, public data is also made available in a very interoperable way.
Yeah.
Because that way the data is not just accessible, like technically accessible. Sure, like if you're able to, connect to this S3 bucket, like create an ID, like exchange a token, and do some queries, you can technically have access to this data, and everyone could technically do that. But at the same time, access is indeed not the same as usability. So I believe that interoperability bridges that gap between technical access and actual usability. And yeah, in terms of innovation, that opens the doors wide open, I would say.
So I assume that you mentioned earlier about from the outside in, a lot of people seeing geospatial data as being too complex. Do you feel as if interoperability potentially eases that pain, maybe answers that
Absolutely.
challenge?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a critical step for any organization that works with geospatial data to make. Like I like to say that, and it also relates to my previous point. Like before, and then I'm talking like a reasonable decade into the past, but maybe also as recent as 5 years into the past, that the spatial data domain was for GIS specialists, people who went to school to deal with this type of data. But today, GIS data needs to be accessible for just the regular data scientist, for any developer, for domain experts, for policymakers. Everyone needs to be able to access this content, and it's entirely possible as long as we think about how we make data available in an interoperable way, and how we make sure that we play by general IT rules.
We're speaking a lot about IT at this moment in time, but I'm keen to understand if there are any cultural or mindset barriers that hold the field back as much as the technical ones.
I think so. Yes, I think we still have like the old guard and the new guard within the geospatial industry. The old guard being those people who went to school to deal with spatial data, like those who use like classic ArcGIS or classic QGIS,
Yeah,
that really see themselves as the stewards of the spatial data of their organization and the creators of maps on demand, and they will see they'll definitely see problems with the industry, but at the same time they also see themselves as the solvers of those problems and the need for like that human manual touch, whereas other people feel like, well, at least 80% of their work should be automated away. And to be frank, I'm one of those people. Like I believe that the classic GIS work, which includes data management and taking care of transformations, like that can and should be automated. When it
right.
comes to applying smart analytics, like interpreting what you're seeing, that's a human job, and in some cases an AI job, and in some cases a combination of both. But I do think there is like a cultural adversity when it comes to introducing some new ways of working and sort of being open to automating things that can be automated for sure.
And that is another topic that does come up quite frequently, not necessarily in recording some of these episodes, but when speaking with candidates and clients, is this idea that there are some areas of geospatial that is considered legacy. And that actually we are now going through a phase, especially over the past 18 months, of somewhat evolution. What are your thoughts on that? And what I mean by that is, are we heading through like an evolution period, like a real transition period from, as you mentioned, the old guard to the new guard? We're seeing introductions of foundation models over the past few years, something that maybe we haven't seen before. We are seeing, products that are being released by the likes of Google in Alpha Earth. Be keen to get your opinion on the new guard and what that could potentially mean for us moving forward.
Hmm. Yeah, there's definitely an evolution going on. I believe that's an ongoing that's an ongoing process in any day in any age.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, today we're definitely seeing that as you're hiring for example, geospatial talent, you can and should definitely wonder like, hey, do I need a classic GIS person? Or
Hmm.
am I looking at a data scientist who is very well versed in using geospatial data? Or am I looking to actually hire like a geo developer that can create applications and workflows for me and automate as much as they can? There is like um, multiple different classes of GIS professionals that have become increasingly relevant. Um, and that, as far as like data management and infrastructure goes, which is our forte, all need to be serviced from an infrastructure perspective as well. But yeah, that evolution is happening, and I think it makes a lot of sense that new talent and people that look for that talent sort of go through the options very closely.
Going back to Ellipsis Drive, um, and given the fact that we are, as you've mentioned, as I've witnessed, we are going through this evolution within the industry. How is this evolution serving your business? What sort of challenges is it bringing to your business to basically make complex matters a lot more simpler to understand, a lot more standardized?
Hmm. So, I mean, the our raison d'être, to speak in faulty French, like our reason of existing as Ellipsis Drive is of course the challenge that we've sort of underlined here. So the
Hmm.
challenge of classic GIS experts being replaced by this, well, not necessarily replaced, but rather being expanded to include many other professions that need to be working with spatial data directly on the source. That challenge, that transition, that's something that Ellipsis Drive is here to support by indeed making sure that all the content, all the spatial content that an organization may host is accessible and usable by all of those downstream audiences. So that's something that benefits us as a company. So we in that sense like that transition, because if that transition hadn't taken place, the market would still be pretty happy with just like classic, for example, ArcGIS solutions.
I'm also keen to understand, and I feel like you have somewhat touched on this already. What have you learned from users about what they actually want from spatial data systems? And how does that differ from what the industry has historically provided, given the fact we are talking about legacy systems quite often at this particular point in the discussion?
Mm. Yeah, so people do want that scalability. They want flexibility. They also want to avoid lock-in, and all of those things can sometimes be difficult to find. Um, but we do definitely see that, yeah, the push for that flexibility, interoperability, and lock-in exists. Um, Also, very much pushed for by governments again, that sort of see it as their task to, yeah, make sure that there is not one platform to rule them all, which in some cases can be difficult because there definitely are like a few legacy market leaders that will always have a presence, and that I think we should be okay with as long as we sort of recognize, the strengths and the weaknesses of a player like that, and sort of make sure that we fill up the gaps.
Yeah.
I still thoroughly believe that legacy providers provide solutions for the old guard within GIS, and
Yeah.
new providers need to make sure that they plug into their solutions, that they are interoperable with those older solutions, but at the same time properly support the new guard in doing their jobs, and that's what you sort of see the demand grow for. So if you offer a solution that is yeah, by design interoperable, and that by design is open to plugging in new providers, the fear for lock-in is also less, because people feel like they will always have options. Like, hey, they may at this point, use Power BI as their dashboarding tool, but they might as well switch over to Tableau. That would be fine, or something open source that will work as well. They can switch between QGIS and ArcGIS, as long as like the underlying platform that services out data, like Ellipsis Drive, is properly interoperable and can like play nicely with all of them.
We've spoken about interoperability. We've also spoken about versatility. We've spoken about convergence as well. And looking forward, do you think that we're headed towards true convergence between geospatial and the broader data science ecosystem? Or will those silos that you've mentioned remain?
Hmm. So the tricky part of that question is that you're saying true convergence. I do believe that we're heading towards convergence,
Okay,
um,
yeah.
and that's a great thing.
Hmm.
That sounds like true convergence. I'll choose to take that to mean that like different types of data and these different worlds of like non-spatial data, spatial data, but also, for example, relational data, which can't be fitted into a table either,
Hmm.
truly converge, and that will never be the case because they are truly fundamentally different data types that need to be managed differently.
Hmm.
But I will say that we will head towards true convergence in the sense that at least they will all be accessible and mergeable in a unified and standardized way. Um, that's where I see the market heading, and it's also the only sort of answer that is really logical here. So I don't really believe that, um, let's say 15 years into the future, we'll still deal with the exact same problems that we deal with today. I'm sure there's a host of new challenges, but yeah, that convergence will happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like the fact that you embrace that. I think it's really, really important. Well, look, it has been an absolute pleasure bringing you on to today's episode of Earth Observed. Do you have any sign-off points that you'd like to make around today's episode? Any exciting things that may be happening regarding Ellipsis Drive over the coming 6 to 12 months?
I will say one thing. We're looking to launch a new capability as part of Ellipsis Drive that we call Ellipsis Map Engine. And
Nice.
Map Engine is really looking to bridge the gap between the experience that people know and love in doing like ad hoc quick data science on tabular data and being able to do the exact same thing on raster data as well. And I think that's a very new thing we're introducing, and it will be part of that convergence movement. So yeah, stay tuned for more info on that.
Absolutely. Anyone's interested, please do forward your questions to Rosalie. Of course, I'm sure the team over there would be more than happy to answer some of those. But look, that has been today's episode of Earth Observed. For those who've made it to this point in the episode, thank you very much. In the meantime, take care. Hello, and thank you for watching today's episode of Earth Observed, powered by DeepRec AI. If you're interested in joining me for an episode of your own to discuss a topic of your choice, do get in contact with me. And of course, if you are looking to scale your team within geospatial, Earth data, or atmospheric AI, please do get in contact. I'd love to understand how I can support you. Until next time, have a great day.